So this workshop today, Saturday morning, May 9th at 10:14 a.m. We are expanding what we left off with Security Onion. Last time we covered all of the NIDS components, or Network Intrusion Detection System. Now we are covering the HIDS section, or Host-Based Intrusion Detection System, as far as integrating with Security Onion. So this is yes, what we covered last time. Yeah, definitely good to revisit this. So based off of Security Onion, here's kind of the process flow. So we have, if we're running NIDS, of course, we have, like we said, our span port and our management port. Management port is where it actually is given an IP address, in my case, 10.0.0.20. You can set that to whatever you want. And then that's where you communicate with. The span port, or this on the switch, and the sniffing port on the sensor is how it gets NIDS data, so Suricata and Bro. That is not assigned an IP. It's just put in promiscuous mode, like you would if you're running Wireshark and sniffing for wireless traffic. You'd put the monitor, your Wi-Fi monitor or Wi-Fi card, in promiscuous mode, sniff traffic, and then your security or your Suricata and Bro are running analysis on all of that traffic that's coming through. That is sitting at the same level down here as OSSEC. So, but in OSSEC's case, here's where the clients would be. This is, so if we say this is my Windows PC here, this is forwarding all of my logs, including sysmon and autorun, to my Security Onion server, which is then being analyzed by OSSEC. So all of the analysis that's done by NIDS and HIDS is then pushed into Logstash. So this is where the elk stack sits, and these are all running in containers. I won't go really into that. It's not really part of this, but and it comes out of the box. So Logstash, like I said, is really a giant pile of where you can send all of your logs. It's a log aggregator. You don't have to send just your own NIDS and HIDS logs to this. You could send gray logs to it, or gray log. You can send firewall logs to it. Anything that uses log forwarder. If you want to forward any kind of stuff. So with all of what we discussed last time with the network sensor monitoring and having to configure a span port on the switch so that Security Onion can sniff traffic coming into the sniffing interface. For Suricata and Bro, the NIDS tools that we had talked about, to have OSSEC or WASA or these other HIDS tools that we'll talk about coming. Those don't require a span port because in this case we're not doing anything on the network traffic or sniffing level. This is all more host-based detection things. So you can stand a Security Onion server up and not have any of the network components or network IDSs running. You can just configure it to have just be your host-based server and then configure clients to that. Or in the case that I have running and we'll be demonstrating today in my home lab, I have both components. So it's doing the network intrusion detection and the host-based intrusion detection. So by default, and I think we briefly covered this last time at the end, Security Onion is by default, when you install it, an OSSEC server, and it is a client of itself. So while you don't have to use Security Onion to run an OSSEC server or WASA server, it already comes pre-installed. All of the logs are set to go and parsed automatically by Security Onion to go to the elk stack. If you remember last time, that's Elastic, Search, Logstash, and Kibana. Kibana being the web user interface that we log into. So this is very plug and play with the whole Security Onion distro. So it is very common to just see OSSEC and WASA for servers, people just standing up Security Onion using that, even if they're not using the network components, since everything is already parsed and plug and play with it. So how does host-based intrusion detection differ from, let's say, endpoint detection response or your typical AV kind of software? So I think we covered last time a little bit with AV in regards to the network level. So we'll talk about the host-based level. So when we talk about antivirus, your regular, we won't go into like the business grade, but let's just say your regular end user consumer product, like your Kaspersky consumer grade product, or your Norton antivirus, your Windows Defender. Those are vastly going to function off of signature-based detections. And if we recall from the last video, signature-based detections are based on known bad or malicious file hashes. So basically what it does is every file that is downloaded or executed, um, uh, the antivirus takes a hash of it. It runs the hash through a very large database of known malicious hashes, and if it comes up with a match, then it'll flag it as potentially malicious. You may want to further investigate this, and so on. What it doesn't do is your behavioral-based or anomaly-based detections. Those are kind of things where your EDR, endpoint detection response, and your host-based intrusion detection will come in. So while your HIDS will also have a plugin for your antivirus, your hash-based, signature-based detection, there's also another component which does behavioral-based and anomaly-based detection. And when I say behavior-based and anomaly-based, so every user has a unique way of using a computer. And eventually, over time, you can build kind of a baseline on what is normal for that user and what is not normal for that user. Um, Even though something may be not normal, it's not always malicious. It's just saying this is deviated from normal baseline behavior. So this is an anomaly, which may or may not be malicious, but it's warranted to at least be investigated. So on a network level, for Bro, since that can do anomaly-based and more behavior-based detection, as opposed to Suricata, which is just going to be your signature-based detection. Let's say on average, as a home user, with me running a few servers here and there, I'm just running maybe 50 gigs of internet traffic, ingress and egress every day. Give or take, 5 gigs. It's, between 40 and 60 every day. Maybe I have a bro script in there on the network level that says, if anything is outside of my normal baseline, which is 40 or 60, go ahead and alert me. It may not be malicious, but it's not my normal baseline of network behavior. And then I can go in there and inspect and say, maybe there is some kind of data exfiltration. If I just see 120 gigs, maybe there's sort of, some sort of, like, data exfiltration or data loss prevention or something, some kind of, large egress going out of my network that's not normal. The same thing with, if there's 0 gigs that traverses the network through that day, maybe I'm out of town or just not home that day. It doesn't have to be malicious, but it at least throws an anomaly, and it's not in accordance with the normal network baseline. So this kind of baseline behavior is where we get into the host-based part of HIDS versus NIDS. So the big industry standard HIDS open source product is going to be OSSEC. This was developed a while ago. Trend Micro has contributed heavily to it. And basically what it is, this is, I find Logs.io, this one comparing different HIDS sources to be a really good one to just start off with defining what HIDS is and, getting, where OSSEC fits in versus some other open source projects. So basically, HIDS will have some pre-established rules that we'll go through. Some of those are signature-based, some of those are behavior-based, some of those are anomaly-based. And basically, what's going on with Security Onion Server is it's collecting logs from the clients, and it's analyzing all of those logs. So obviously, the more logs you're able to get into Security Onion SIM, the better, because then you can go back and do time-based analysis. You have more data to develop a baseline, and then see where deviations fall, within that, as well as anomalies. So for OSSEC, short for Open Source Security Event Correlator, still probably the most popular one, although the fork of it, Waza, is gaining popularity tremendously, and we'll go into that one since they're kind of interchangeable, but they do have different functionality. So this one, free and open source on GitHub. You can see all the source code on it. It's great. It's been in use for a long time. It used to be notorious for kind of once you set it up, and the environment had to be very static. There was no automation in it. It was a complete drag to update. It was really meant for just static networks running on servers that weren't changing a lot. Not really meant for user workstations that had a lot of updates and things like that. But it has come a long way and is definitely compatible with all of these things. So it has a client-server architecture. So the server that's doing all the analysis in our case is running on Security Onion. OSSEC has a client that can be downloaded on Windows, different Linux distributions, Mac OS. I believe they have some BSD ones now, and even running in containers. I'll go into that a little later. So basically, HIDS tool and what you're going to get out of the HIDS based off of other antivirus tools is on the log analysis. You're also going to be able to do file integrity monitoring, or FIM. And what this does is if you have a file that you want to know if there are any changes to that file. Let's say you have a database that should be read-only, never should be written to, or the data should never be modified. Or let's say you're on an incident response engagement and you're collecting data and you want to ensure that data never changes. You want to ensure the integrity of the data by taking file hashes. If you're running an OSSEC agent on the client machine that you're collecting all this data on, there are file integrity monitoring rules that say the checksum or the hash of this file has changed, meaning in some way that file or folder has been modified, and then you can go and do investigation on that. This is very popular for, like I said, databases that should not be updated or changed. Some user management tools, a lot of popular things in enterprises where they need file integrity monitoring as part of the solution. This also does policy monitoring. So based on users, what kind of user access control they have, if they try to escalate so many times, escalating to, which user. I'll go into that further. Rootkit detection. Rootkits are difficult to detect. It's got some tools in there. We'll go over kind of that. And more recently, active response. So what OSSEC doesn't do is the alternative is kind of HIPS or host-based intrusion prevention system. All of your HIDS tools are going to be solely detection based. So they're not actually blocking anything. They'll just be notifying and then leave it up to you to do the investigation on. With active response, that actually introduced a little bit of prevention in response to an alert. So for example, if it notices, if you have a Linux server, if it notices 10 SSH authentication failures in a very short period of time, not only will it throw an alert saying there's been multiple authentication failures in a predetermined amount of time, which could indicate brute forcing. It will also do an active response script, deploy that on the agent to say block the IP address that this host is coming from for a predetermined amount of time, or you can build any amount of custom scripts to just say, stop the the SSH daemon server so that nobody can SSH into. So there has been more, response through the tool itself rather than human interaction as of late, and they are building along that. As I said, can do signature and anomaly-based with behavior-based detection methods. OSSEC is a server agent model. So there's a dedicated server, and then you have the agent. So we'll go into that as well. So here is kind of the architectural model of that. In this case, our OSSEC server is also our security onion server. And then as the agents here, as an example, you may have, you can see up here, a web server, a database, a firewall. OSSEC is a good choice for a powerful log analysis engine, as well as installing an agent on an operating system. OSSEC also has an agentless-based client, and that's for where, let's say you have a UniFi switch, a router, some kind of IoT device where you can't actually install something on it. It communicates log files over SSH to still be able to do log analysis on the machine itself for clients or hardware that you cannot install an actual client on. Like I said, this is good for switches, routers, your networking-based equipments where you still want to have some kind of visibility into, but you're not actually able to install, an executable or a Debian package or something like that. And we'll go into that as well. So Waza is actually a fork of OSSEC. Basically, the ask of, or the use case of Waza was OSSEC is kind of antiquated. We want to bring this more modern toolkit and integration with OSSEC out of the box. So where OSSEC and Waza differ is where Waza uses anomaly and signature detection methods to detect rootkits and some other things. But the biggest thing and the differentiator is where Waza was built to integrate with the ELK stack right out of the box. So where OSSEC, you have to configure it if you're not using a security onion server. If you're just using like an irregular Ubuntu box and you want to install OSSEC server on it, then you have to install ELK on it, and then you have to configure OSSEC to talk to ELK. If you install Waza, the ELK stack is coming with it. It's all integrated. It comes with the parsers, all of that stuff right out of the box. There is an improved rule set. They keep it more updated. I would say kind of OSSEC is more on the Debian related side, where they're going to favor the stability and over functionality. So some of these rules I've had experience with, they're just not good, maybe poorly written, but they're pushed, and they're more on the functionality side, where you would have like Ubuntu, where they favor kind of the newer functional stuff over like something where Debian, where they're very cautious of what they push. It's very well tested. It's known as a stable product. So also, OSSEC does not have an API. Waza does have an API. So for developers and security engineers who want to be able to talk to Waza and be able to have it do things, you don't have to log into the actual operating system that it's running on. You can just communicate directly via its API. It's also much better at monitoring Docker containers by focusing on their persistent volumes and bind mount. With that said, that was mainly pushed so that OSSEC and Waza can move into the container space, since those are becoming more popular, but it's not the best solution for containers. It doesn't really monitor runtime applications, which is really the best thing you can do for containers, but it's really better than having no visibility in there. So as I said, OSSEC serves as just an agent of the server. Waza serves as the agent, server, and the entire Elastic or ELK stack. They both run on a variety of operating systems. Solaris is even in there. Both are very well documented. I'll go into some of the differences in the dashboard. As you can see, this kind of looks like when we went off last time, and I'll pull this up shortly. But our security onion dashboard and how we can filter OSSEC through there. So basically, when you install Waza, you're going to get, and this being Kibana, you have your manager, your agents up here, Discover, some other dashboards. This is only pertaining to Waza. You will not have any network, any of your Suricata or Bro data in here. This is purely when you're installing Waza. This is all Waza logs, as opposed to on Security Onion, when you're getting all of this stuff, you're getting the OSSEC logs as well, and we'll dive through some of the differences. But everything that you can see through, the Waza interface is basically what you're seeing through the Kibana interface in Security Onion for OSSEC. So with that said, does anyone have any questions, comments before I go on to the Security Onion server?
No, I feel like I'm going to have a big, I don't know how to, big undertasking trying to set this up for the first time and getting it running just to play with it.
It's it's a little easier than it can be intimidating at first. It's pretty simple. Part of that is what I'll walk through here in a bit. OSSEC does have its own site, OSSEC.net. Downloads, they have documentation, blog, more about the product. Atomic Corp is kind of the main contributor to it right now, and on their website, they actually have a paid support and paid tier for distributing and maintaining, upgrading, things like that. They've moved. Well, not moved, but they've integrated a lot of cloud workload in there. So Atomic Quark is the main thing. They have, what do you get with just regular OSSEC? What do you get with Atomic Quark? It comes with the GUI and all this other type of stuff. Waza also has its own, product page for, they have paid stuff, kind of goes more into how it works architecturally, has its own documentation page, file integrity, vulnerability detection, how to deploy in containers. If you are running OSSEC, how to migrate from OSSEC to Waza. So I'll leave those up for you all to take a look at. So I'm going to jump over to the Security Onion box. Okay, so if we remember from last time, this is the Kibana interface for Security Onion. So I didn't change anything last time, built any new dashboards. We have our NIDS alert data, we have our HIDS alert data. HIDS is going to be where our OSSEC and Waza data is, being the HIDS components of Security Onion. So I'm going to click on that. And remember that Security Onion is OSSEC server, but it also runs the OSSEC client on itself. So Security Onion does monitor itself with HIDS. So I'll go into how to deploy an agent here. So this is where Waza may be a little easier with their. It comes with their own dashboard, their own pre-built elk, just customized to Waza. This is a little bit more command line based with OSSEC and deploying. It's not difficult. There's a lot of documentation out there. Once you do it once or twice, it's just kind of common nature after that. So everything on OSSEC and host-based intrusion detection on Security Onion is stored in var OSSEC. And really the important things here, there's not a whole lot you really have to pay attention to off the bat, but is your binary directory. This contains, in green, if the file is green in Linux, it's executable. So what we do first is manage agents. So here, when we run manage agents, you can add an agent. I'll go into an extract a key is, list already added agents, or remove an agent. So for example, for me, if I want to list my agents, it won't list the local host, as it won't list the Security Onion server. as an active agent in here. But my Windows PC, which I am doing this demo on, I have already added here. So basically how you would just go about adding an agent on the server side is manage agents. We want to select A for add an agent. Whatever name you want to give the agent, I would recommend some kind of whatever the naming convention you use for this. Just make sure for best practices sake and for tracking and asset management sake, you want a consistent naming basis. I just named mine Windows PC, so that's plain and obvious. You don't have to name it after the actual host name of the PC. OSSEC will log that, but from a management standpoint in OSSEC, you can name it whatever you want. So I did mine for a Windows PC, so we'll just add test. The IP address, you don't have to do this, but if it's a static environment, you can add the IP address of the agent. It's okay if it changes. I went ahead and just added mine. You can prompt for it, but it'll just say whatever 10.9. It'll confirm. And now once we do this, on the agent side, and I'll go into the agent installation, but it will need a key in order for it to actually authenticate. So once an agent is added, we need to extract the key for that agent. And you can do this on, and this key will never change. So we just added this test agent on the server, and it will assign a numerical ID, and it will just iterate by 1 as you add them. So the agent key information for 003 is this, and you'll just want to copy and paste the key so that you have it when you run the actual installer. And you can always extract a key for an agent that you've already installed on, like my Windows box that I already have. If I forget it for some reason and I need it, it's here. So maybe, if you don't want to have to go into this console every time to extract the key, you can keep the key in some other separate database and not have to go in here to retrieve it. So, as far as an agent, Ubuntu 20 actually doesn't support it yet, and that's what I'm running on one of my home laptop, so I couldn't install it on that one. But it has an apt installer, and it just runs through OSSEC. It'll just prompt you for the server IP, which is my Security Onion server, and then the actual key for that agent. So if you're doing this probably more often, or maybe not, on a Windows box, I'll walk you through that what that looks like. And remember, anytime you download software, download it from official repos. I don't recommend CNET or things like that. But so OSSEC has the download. So if you are running not running Security Onion and you want to install the server or agent, there is a download for that. Since we already are running Security Onion, it comes pre-installed with all of that. We don't need to worry about it. OSSEC also has a web UI. It's very finicky and buggy. The last time I tested it was maybe a few months ago. Maybe they've had progress on it. I've had much more success just using the built-in Security Onion dashboard. This is really, if you're not running on Security Onion and you don't have an existing elk stack, then it comes with a UI. I find the Security Onion to just be much more functional and out of the box, ready to go. So you can install on Linux. Like I said, if you're on CentOS-based stuff and you're using Yum, there's a Yum installer for it. If you're on a Debian-based distro, you can use apt to apt install, or you can install the binary and run it that way. Or they have the Docker container. They have a VM ready with it installed. There's a chocolatey package. The Windows agent is very easy. It's just an executable, which I already downloaded. You will need administrator rights to run it. So for my test instance, I just did this. Now it will say it's already running and I have to stop it before running, but I'll just go ahead and agree. I have enabled scan and monitor IIS logs, Internet Information Services, if you are running that, and integrity checking If you don't want to do any file integrity monitoring or integrity checking, you don't have to. I just left it on. By default, like most other programs, this will install in C, program files 86, OSSEC agent. It's already installed, so I'm just kind of overwrite some stuff. Next, run. And then here's where we get our pop-up. So the OSSEC server IP, in my case, is just my security onion server IP, which is 10.0.0.20. And this is the key that I was talking about on the server. So for my Windows PC, I extracted the key here. I just copy and pasted the agent key and pasted it into the authentication key, saved this, and then as soon as you enter that, it's not going to start by default. As you can see, the status is stopped. All we have to do is start OSSEC, agent is running, and now we are good to go. It's going to start on boot. It's going to run in the background. We don't have to worry about it on the agent really ever again. It's good to go. So now we can manage everything from the server. So a couple of other ones, binaries to get familiar with other than manage agents is agent control. And this comes with a few flags. So we can list our available agents, and this will list, if whether they're active or not. In this case, active or not basically means whether they're currently online and talking to the OSSEC server. So if your PC is powered off, or it's not networked, or it can't talk to the OSSEC server, it won't. It's not considered active. So there is a flag for listing active agents only. There's a flag for listing disconnected agents, extracting information. So I'll run some of these. And then there's flags for running an integrity or rootkit check on all agents now, as opposed to it's on a cron. I believe it's just once a day that it does that. You can set it for twice a day, 3 times a day. You can edit that setting. And then, or you can do it on just a particular agent if you feel like you have to do some other things. And list available active responses. What I was talking about, you have a little bit more of the prevention capability. And by default, there are not many. It's just your host deny. Like I said, if it looks like you're brute forcing, it's going to append this to the host deny file in the default firewall drop file, so that whatever is sending the malicious traffic or DDoS or whatever is blocked. So if I run the agent control and I'll pass it the TAC LC, so list active agents only. The security onion server agent is active and local. And this is the Windows PC that I am giving the demo on, so that is active. But if we run the TAC L, you'll see it listed our test. I didn't install, there's no test box that I'm installing this on, and it never connected. If it has connected, but is not active, instead of saying never connected, it will list the last time that it did connect to the server. As far as infrastructure goes, the agents communicate with the server over port UDP 1519. So if you are running UFW, or if you're running this on a standalone like CentOS box, you can use Firewall D or something else like that. But for my case, I'm using UFW to allow SSH to my security union server 443 in order to access Kibana on the web interface, and 1514 UDP to allow for OSSEC traffic to get to the server. There is some automation now for adding agents. You don't have to go through the product keys and things like that. That's what this auth D for it is for. It just sets up a listening daemon, and anything that connects to it, even without a product key, it will just accept as an OSSEC client. You can do that it's better for like large scale distributions. OSSEC was certainly not built to like scale. It was really meant to run on like your very important infrastructure, like your web servers, your database servers and things like that, not meant for just your typical user endpoint. But since they are trying to scale more, and Waza has taken a lot of that role over, they have kind of built this more automated, distributed management and authorization process. Security Onion does run OSSEC and Wazab side by side because they are kind of integrating. They're eventually Wazab will just overtake OSSEC, but that's in the work with Doug Burks and the other maintainers of Security Onion. OSSEC agents will not upgrade by default. You actually have to prompt for them to upgrade, and you can do that from the server if you were not used to be able to do that from the server. You got to do that from a repository. Here you can just pass the agent ID you want to upgrade in. You have to actually specify the repository URL. This is still kind of a manual process. It's actually easier to just do it on the client. So a few things, that's really the bulk of it. And here, everything else is kind of, good to go. So the only other thing in here that I look at is rules. And there's a lot of them out of the box, which is great. As you can see, there's a lot of different categories, and it monitors a lot of different types of software out of the box. There's also a lot more that are on GitHub that are just contributed by the community. You can write your own OSSEC rules to monitor whatever you want and alert on whichever. But all of these come out of the box. So there's ones that monitor logs for postfix, a lot of different mail servers, your sendmail postfix, IMAP. Spam, mail scanner, Exchange. There's for Cisco iOS, Dell SonicWall, stuff for Telnet, stuff for SSH, DHCP. There's a whole bunch of different things that are in here. Qualys, Silence, VirusTotal, Proxmox, just a ton of different things that are in here. I'll go through an example of a rule. So we'll just take the SSH category here, 0095 SSHD rules. And this is what example rules look like here. So what we're seeing is a configuration file. And if you remember to NIDS, they used 1, 2, and 3, so high, medium, and low for their classifications. OSSEC uses levels 0 through 15, with 15 being absolutely critical. Look at this right now. Something is being exploited. 0 is your typical informational debug kind of message. And of course, you can append these and edit them to your liking. So these are all out of the box classifications and levels and what the strings say. So this one is possible attack on a SSH server. There's a level 8. You can modify that if you think that that's not appropriate. You can turn that up. You can turn it down. And one thing that's really cool that OSSEC integrated a while ago that was also has is it does compliance with that rule. So it will list that under groups. This is in accordance with PCI DSS, GPG, GDPR. They also have CIS, NIST, and a wealth of other benchmarking and compliance standards based on each rule. So this is just reading off of the SSHD file or authentication file in Linux and var log. There's a possible break-in attempt. Kind of gives you a high-level overview of what's going on. The actual rule syntax is a little bit more difficult. I probably won't go into that today. OSSEC rule building is kind of a different topic on its own. But these are all, where all the rules are stored. So at a high level, you can go through your var OSSEC rules directory, and this is everything. So if you want to look at, there's more FTP rules, or, if you're running a specific software on their web application security, if you're running a Squid proxy server to pull those logs, Nginx server, any of these, OpenVPN, really good kind of rules and detector, logic on there. Once that's all done, you have the agent running, it's talking to the server. I've already kind of generated some potentially malicious alerts and stuff on my machine last night for us to look at. And we will start looking at that in Kibana. Does anyone have, I know we covered a lot there. Does anyone have any questions, comments?
No, this is probably exactly what I was looking for. So thank you.
Yes, awesome. So, yeah, so on the OSSEC download, and sorry, I forgot to cover it actually. They don't support Ubuntu 20.04 right now. I don't even think they cover 19. Like 18 is the last one that they actually support. I tried downloading last night, and there's just a bunch of error messages when running the install script. But if you download the tar.gz, you'll just unzip it, untar it, and there's just a binary script install.sh. That's all you do. You run the install.sh script. It'll just ask you for the, like we saw in Windows, the server IP and the key associated with that agent. That's all there is to it. And then you're good to go on Linux. And that sets up persistence to run in the background and on boot. So you can do that way or the apt way. Either one is fine. And that will also be stored in var OSSEC on the Linux distribution as well. So, and based on your distribution, it will, identify that. Different installers for RHEL, CentOS, and Fedora. Amazon Linux has its own. Ubuntu and Debian have their own, and then some cloud marketplace stuff. And if you want to install it from source, you can, do that. Here's the apt installer. You're just adding the Atomicorp repository, and then updating and installing it. There's a manual install, so kind of pick your poison there, see which one you want to do. There's a lot of functionality with that. So on my Windows box, and on my Windows box and on the actual Security Onion server, like I said, we have OSSEC clients running. So off the bat, alert, under alert data, HIDS is where I'm at here. And so here's all of our OSSEC at a high level overview, log count over time. I just stood it up on my Windows box a little while ago, and it was asleep before that, so there was not going to be any logs gathered. But we can see we have log activity going on. After that, OSSEC, event summary, kind of the most recent descriptions of alerts and what severity each one is off of. So I'm generally not concerned with anything less than like a 10. Those are usually either just, not worth looking into or false positives. I'm not really, if someone's SSH brute forcing, you can move that up, but it's, generally someone, it can easily be misidentified as just you forgot your password and you failed at entering the password 3 times, and it'll identify that as an SSH brute forcing. So one other thing OSSEC does very well is it actually can serve as kind of a knock monitoring tool. So you can see here, there's actually an alert for received 0 packets in designated time interval. This means that on our sniffing interface for NIDS, we have received 0 packets in the last time interval. Please check interface, cabling, and tap or span port. I currently, since I got some new networking gear, moved my span port. I didn't set it up yet, so I don't have any packets coming in. So that is nice that it does alert you on things like that. You can also, for any kind of, if you're running applications like Nginx or Apache web servers, it'll modify that that's been down or hasn't received packets. So it does do some knock stuff, which is pretty cool. This is one of them. You'll see a lot of integrity checksum change, especially when you're running apt update and it has to change files and update things. Changing UID to root. There is a login session open when I just logged in via SSH. Windows failed attempt to perform a privilege operation, meaning anytime I have to run something with privileges and I enter the wrong privileges. So whatever, just enter some text. You enter the wrong password. That'll log failed to attempt perform privilege. On Linux, you'll get a successful sudo to root executed. So, on my box, if I sudo su, and enter the password. I will get that message UID changed, and then there was a successful authentication to root. These are only over the past, let's see, we have 24 hours. There's a lot more. There's over that time frame. There's 2-3 pages and whatnot. So suppose we just want to look at, let's say, the highest of alerts that we have here, which is 10. I can actually come in here and just click on where it says alert level 10. There were 60 of them. If I move my mouse to scroll over, it's going to move. But it pops up with that field, alert level 10. There's been 60 of them, which is 2.9% of our total alert values so far. So I can actually click on that, and this will filter it. You'll see at the top, now this is filtering off of alert level keyword 10. So if I wanted to do, I could actually manually change this to, for example, if I want to look at the ones that are, the other ones that are populated. I don't have any that are 9 or 13 or 14. It'll only give me what's actually been reported, which is nice. But for now, I'll just filter off of 10. The only one that I have for 10 that OSSEC rates as a 10, multiple failed attempts to perform a privilege operation by the same user. So it's like looking at my, so it is looking at my Baio user and saying, I have failed multiple times to enter a password to do a privileged operation. This, you won't get a level 10 if you fail at it just once, but there's been multiple failures in a certain allotted time frame, and OSSEC feels that's worthy of a level 10 severity. So, and we can get more information on that a couple different ways, but by scrolling all the way to the bottom, we can see the most recent one, which took place at 10:55, just a couple minutes ago, and it will give out the full table or JSON view. Table is going to be a little bit easier to read, but for troubleshooting, some people like the full JSON. So it will give you a plethora of information here. So the agent IP is an important one. That's my Windows machine that I'm doing the demo on. The agent name is Windows PC that I've named it. What is the classification? Where's the data coming from? It's coming from Microsoft Windows Security Auditing. The log number in that on Windows is 4673. Data status is audit failure. It gives you the actual domain, Soteria. I just have one set up here, a test one here. The account name that it failed with, the login ID on the server. This is the actual system name, is the actual host name of the server. This can or cannot, depending how you name it, differ from the agent name. So in OSSEC, when I was adding the agent and it asked for the agent name, I just named it Windows PC. But the actual name of the laptop itself is Surface 01 Soteria.LAN. So that's pulling the actual host name of the device as opposed to what you named it when you were provisioning the agent. The actual description, multiple failed attempts, event type is OSSEC. This gives more of the full log, account name, Baio. All of this information is parsed out here, but it also gives the process name, chrome.exe. So I was doing stuff with Chrome, and I kept failing. So it gives you the actual application, which is cool. It's pulling all of this information is coming out of Windows event log. Sec onion is the name of my security onion server, and then the full message that will contain additional data if you want to look into some of that stuff. But all of this, most of all of this stuff is parsed out here in the table. I think that's the bottom of the screen. Yes. So yeah, we can look at that there. So let's say we want to look at this in the actual Discover tab. There's a couple ways to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the filter, which was just looking at things that are 10. So we can actually get a good understanding of what fields we can pivot off of and investigate on in OSSEC based off of just the event type, which in this case is going to be OSSEC. So I'll look at just the first log here and notice that, so off the bat, we can kind of see that this is a agent ID is 000, meaning this is the local host. This is my security onion client, OSSEC client. So 3 is an alert level. There's a successful authorized event. This is when I was logging into Kibana. I passed in my credentials. I was authorized. This is the URL that it went to. This is the log that I pulled from. This was the client machine that I logged in from. There was a post request to Elastic, some other fields. So we can actually filter off of any of these fields. So, for example, if I do want to look at things that are only associated with, I'll actually go into my Windows PC for this, but for this one, so there was an audit success, meaning I successfully elevated privileges. So basically, let's see, I only want to be able to filter off of, I only want to look at logs that have to do with my Windows PC. So up here in the search bar, I can just add an and operator, the agent name, and the agent name is Windows PC. Now, the only logs I'm going to be seeing for the past 24 hours are just relevant to Windows PC. I will not see, if you had OSSEC installed on, it could be 500 different clients, you will only see Windows PC. You can query off of any of these fields in the table like I just did above. If you want to filter off of agent IP, agent ID, if you want to filter off of the actual system name, the data type. You can filter off of decoder name. This is usually like operating system. Any of these fields can be filtered on, especially for, let's see, I know we had one for, change this to onion. Now I'm only viewing my security onion logs. And if I want to look at the fields in there, these will all be the same fields. It'll just filter off of different things. But let's say I only want to filter off of the locations in my authentication logs. So I just want to see, what kind of authentication has been happening in those logs. I can filter off of just location. So I can actually add another and operator and stick location var log auth log. Oh, that's weird that none came up. Oh, actually that's okay. So this is doing more of a grep search, but this will only show logs pertaining to var log auth.log. So any kind of authentication logs in that, this won't show any kind of anything coming from a different log file, Apache log, kernel log, anything nginx log, whatever. It's only showing stuff for auth.log. So I would encourage you to just get used with querying what what different data fields you can filter off of. You can filter off of port. If it's something that's coming over the network, any of these things. PAM being the authentication module for Linux. Any of this kind of stuff. If there's cron logs you want to look at, all of these things are queryable. Right here in the top, you can change the time frame. We went over a little bit this last time. Different time frames if you want to do exact, or you can kind of do a drag and drop. Based on any of this data down here. There's no data in that little period, but fortunately, there are also a lot of out-of-the-box dashboards for OSSEC as well. So Security Onion comes with all of these by default. So if I want to look at my OSSEC agents, there is a data table for that. And here, I got to switch that time frame back to, we'll just do last 24 hours. And like I said, I only have 2 things. The amount of logs I have on them, 85,000 logs versus 20,000 logs. And then you can actually, go in here, filter on specific values, build your own visualizations. But there are a ton in here by default, which is awesome. You can do it by alert level, the actual command that was ran, which is pretty cool. So what I was doing before with root, I ran agent control LC, I ran manage agents, I did some stuff with UFW. I went to sudo su, which in Linux would just be calling the su binary in the binary directory, and how many times each of those were ran in the last 24 hours. So a lot of OSSEC stuff built out of the box, and that's also true for NIDS type data as well. A lot of these out of the box. If I want to look at the classification of them, what alerts kind of do I have? These are all of the different alerts that I've had over, the past 24 hours. The first time an agent came online, the first time we've seen an alert. The majority of these just being a successful or authorized event. You entered a correct password. So all of those are available in the visual tab here in Discover. There was another one that I wanted to go into here. Process and username. So just seeing, who executed what, when, and then for user that escalated, which user did they escalate to or change to? Root went to Squeal, which is a system user on Security Onion. I escalated to root for several things, and then mine did for Squeal. Squeal controls a lot of the NID stuff for Suricata, but this is changing to an escalated user, and I can go in there and look at that further. So there are a lot of dashboards by default, a lot of stuff that you can see in the Discover tab. But even if you go back to your dashboard, all that stuff is available under HIDS. And you can also do your queries right here. So everything that I was doing in the Discover tab, I can just do right here as well under that. So your agent name, alert level, all that stuff you can do here. But one of the benefits of doing it here is that you get kind of a more GUI-based search function. So you can click on it and it will auto-populate that search field at the top with alert key level being 7, and then you can edit that to any of the values, like I said, we have here, or it'll have the drop down here with all of those fields that we saw that were in the Discover tab. These are already populated here, so we can filter it off of any of that. Agent name is or agent name is not. There's a lot of different type of operators you can do in here, and then if you want to clear it out, just go back to normal on it. You can do that off of user, process, ton of different things. So that's it from really a dashboard point. There is more with host hunting. This is where if you want to get into an event and you really want to look through logs to know if like a potentially malicious thing has come through. This gives you a lot more detailed information on things that were ran, as far as what exactly was ran by which user, access logs. There's a lot more information in a dashboard in a log like that, as opposed to just your regular stuff. This is meant for, like I said, host hunting. So that that's another one that's interesting to look into. But we don't have a lot of those things. I don't have any malware running. Does anyone have any questions, comments? Want me to recover some stuff in the dashboard? So the architecture here is basically the same as I explained before. We are viewing this from a security engineer or SOC analyst perspective when we're looking in Kibana to view all these logs. But everything I'm doing in the terminal and on Kibana is happening on the OSSEC server, which in this case is the Security Onion server. All of our agents, which I have just as the Windows PC for now, as far as the external agents, there's, like I said, Security Onion monitors itself, so it does have an OSSEC agent on itself. All of these agents communicate with the OSSEC server or with the Security Onion server over UDP port 1514. So as we went through UFW, I have enabled through the firewall on my security onion server port 1514 UDP to be able to capture that traffic from my Windows PC. And if I add PCs later on, then they can communicate with the server over that architecture as well. You can actually go into Logstash and look at the Logstash inputs. So any of these things can be ingested directly into Logstash. So if you were running Security Onion and you wanted to ingest into Logstash, AWS CloudWatch logs, some file logs, Gelf is your gray log server type logs, GitHub logs, tons of GCP type stuff, HTTP. All of these things can be directly integrated into Logstash. S3 logs, if you have a bucket in there, SQLite, syslog, a lot of things use syslog to forward events, just raw TCP and UDP events, WebSocket events. All of these things can be directly fed into there. And there's actually a lot more that are maintained by the community that you can do that. Security Onion has a lot of them already pre-configured in Logstash. So other than just the default, let me see where they are. Comp.d. So by default, all of these are already configured when you set up Security Onion. So Suricata, Bro, all of these, McAfee is even in there, IIS, GreenSQL, pfSense is in there as far as the config. These are all configuration files. Who is age? Obviously, it's going to run Bro, so there's going to be a ton of different Bro stuff. But there's ESX. So all that's needed if you are going to configure additional things are a configuration file. It can take raw network flows, just a ton of different stuff. NTLM for Bro, but WinLog Beat is another one for Windows or any operating system type metrics gathering. All of these are pretty simple to set up. They have examples of all of these under the actual Logstash page, and how the syntax should be to set that up. And then, so once we get that data into Logstash, it's then parsed and aggregated into Elasticsearch, and that is where Kibana does the querying from when you're in the front end here. So everything we see here is data populated from Elasticsearch. So we're querying Elastic. You can actually do it from the command line too. It runs on port 9200. So you can actually send curl requests to post data, to get data, whatever. That's not really part of the scope here. But and then as an analyst, a lot of these things can be exported to Slack, VictorOps, PagerDuty, different Python scripts, email, Confluence, a lot of different types of stuff there. But that's how the data is aggregated and analyzed or parsed and analyzed on Security Onion as a whole. Did I cover that good, Walt?
Yeah, that's what I want. I just wanted people to see which the product names that you were using, where they kind of fit in the architecture, and
definitely
what you're using and what you weren't using. That's perfect. Thank you.
So another cool thing, really the last thing I'll go over with OSSEC is the ability to, like I said, they've made a push for ingesting cloud type stuff. So OSSEC can actually monitor and was a lot of cloud things directly and monitor them. So for example, let's say we have, let me see where these set up. So let's say we have an AWS instance stood up, and we want to manage that with OSSEC Waza. There's actually a really cool process for this. Azure has it. GCP I think is still in the works, but is definitely coming soon. And they have a lot of by default out of the box things for Azure and AWS. So in our var OSSEC rules file, let me grep here for yes. So there's actually a rules file for Amazon. So if we cat that, 50, all of these are on GitHub too, by the way. You don't have to like go into the file system and look at this, but since we're on here, all of these are AWS alert type stuff. So network assessment type stuff. AWS Macy. It captures a lot of stuff for VPC flows, logins, a lot of different stuff for your at a high level AWS environment. And how it does that is actually really cool. So if you've messed with AWS before, there is a logging utility called CloudTrail, which basically pulls all of your AWS logs at a high level from all of your instances and your VPC, and we can create a trail to export to a bucket. And that's what this is essentially doing here. So all of the logs that we have from our AWS instance or VPC or Azure or whatever in their own naming conventions are going into a bucket. And then OSSEC is authenticating and reading from that bucket. So in this case with AWS, we create an S3 bucket. We'll grant read-only access to our security onion server. And then this is just creating a cloud instance to go into that. And then, so basically what on the security onion side is doing is it is passing in a configuration file that stores, actually it was on the web here. So in our var OSSEC etc ossec.conf, we would actually just add a configuration. It's actually got a waddle, but it's AWS S3 for S3 bucket. It is not disabled. We have this enabled if we want to pull S3. So every 10 minutes, it's going to pull new logs or any new logs from the S3 bucket that contains all of the VPC logs generated by CloudTrail. If there's any errors, just keep going. We want this to run on start. Bucket type is CloudTrail. The name of the bucket would be whatever you name it. In this case, the configuration file, it's just was a CloudTrail. And then there is a spot for an actual key to ingest this, which they didn't include in here. Maybe a note at the bottom. But anyway, after you do that, it will actually start ingesting a whole bunch of logs from that. So CloudTrail use cases, you'll get an alert in Kibana on the Security Onion server anytime a new instance is started, anytime you spin up a new instance, instance is stopped, a new security group is created, you've allocated new IP things, a new user was created, without permissions, failed logins, possible break-in, and login successes. So this is giving you just some example of what that would look like in Kibana. So you can see there's a run instances. It'll give you the actual instance type as a T2 micro. Obviously, somebody was testing this out on their own stuff, so they didn't want you to see certain things, but it'll give you the actual account ID, the region that it's in. Identity type is root. It's pulling this from CloudTrail logs. There's just a ton of information that you can get for cloud monitoring at a high level. So that part is really cool. It has that stuff built in for, I know for Azure as well. And it's kind of a TBD thing on Google Cloud. But you can do a lot of the same things with storage blobs, just reading from storage blobs in Microsoft Azure Cloud as well. So it's expanded into really some powerful use cases, and more recently they went into containers and managed Kubernetes type stuff to monitor and different use cases like that. I won't go into all that because it's going to get really technical and kind of outside the scope. But bottom line, you can monitor a lot of your cloud infrastructure with Security Onion, with OSSEC and Waza, and it will all populate in the Kibana portal here. There's not a default one for like cloud. So you would just have to, in the Discover tab, search for like AWS or Azure or wherever you're pulling from, and that will auto-populate with all of those logs in here. So, I will open it up to some Q&A before I rep Soteria a little bit. I know that was a lot, like we did on Security Onions, a lot to cover in a short amount of time. The best way to really go about learning this, there's a lot of documentation on it, is just by standing up your own Security Onion server and just start kind of messing around with it. And once you feel comfortable with everything that we have talked about, then you can really go into like the threat hunting type stuff, like how do we respond to events. Or true positives once they've been identified in here, and kind of how we can move throughout the dashboards and get in more information on that and run things on the host. But that's about good material to cover for today.
Hey, Anthony, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
I'm just wondering, what kind of power do you need for your machine? Like, what kind of specs? Can you run Security Onion on like a Raspberry Pi or something like that for a smaller network, like a little home network?
Yeah, so great question. So Security Onion, I know actually has best practices for architecture or for infrastructure, like depending on the amount of network traffic, how many CPU cores and RAM and disk space you should dedicate to that. I think it's in the documentation. Hardware requirements, yeah. So this is only, so there's not, so an ARM processor, I think Raspberry Pis run on ARM. So that would scratch that out off the bat. They only support 2-bit, I think. So as long as it's not ARM and it's 64-bit, it'll run. However, go ahead.
I'm just wondering, do you know why an ARM wouldn't work? Do you have any idea why it is?
That I don't know. That would be a question for the developers of Security Onion. I don't know how well ARM supports, if I had to guess, containerization. It may have a problem with that because it's using AVM, so I'm not sure how well ARM would support that as far as like Linux containers and virtualization type stuff. Potentially, I'd have to read more into it as of why it doesn't work. However, you could still easily do this on like a laptop, a desktop, anything. Especially if you're not running NIDs, if you're not running Snort and Suricata, which takes up the majority of the processing power. If you're only running like an OSSEC infrastructure, you could deploy something with one CPU and 1 gig of RAM. And unless you have like thousands of clients, it's not going to overwhelm you. If you have just a few, it'll be fine. The only drawback of that would be the query times would be a little slower, but you wouldn't be querying that much data anyway, so I don't think it would make that much of a difference. They have some, what they recommend as far as, Doug Burks on, your master server with local log storage. They recommend 8 CPUs with 6. Yeah. So but this is more meant for enterprises. They're not really gearing this towards like your home users. I nerd out to like servers and stuff, so I have them. This would function perfectly fine in your network environment on a 4-core CPU that's not multi-threaded, and like 4 gigs of RAM. I think would be ample enough. And you can run Suricata on that, and Bro, and just run one instance of each, and then OSSEC on a few of your laptops or desktops or whatever, and still be able to query that and not have things break. So this is more documented for business type stuff where they're sniffing a lot more traffic. They have a lot more users on the network, and potentially more clients to deploy OSSEC on, and they're going to see they have internal SOC analysts that are querying Kibana with potentially heavy queries like everything for the past 7 days and things like that. So no, a pretty low power machine will do it for a home network, especially if you're not running NIDs.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Any other questions, comments, things you want me to review?
Yeah, Anthony, I have a question. Along those same lines, but having to do with hard drive space, when using Security Onion and with all the logs and all other stuff for like home use, what do you think would be a sufficient size for a hard drive?
It doesn't need to be big at all. So, for example, on my home network, which I have a lot of intranet traffic from server to server, although I don't have my span port set up right now. I think I cut that off a couple days ago. I got to reset it up today. But just from running it for, it was about a week with NIDs and all of the sniffing data, and then with all of the OSSEC data that's been going on so far, I only have 11 gigs used, and that's including the operating system. So very little amount of space. I have 4 drives in a RAID array. I only have 305 gigs total on this because I know it's going to take a long time to even occupy all that space. And even when you do start, occupying a lot of space, you can delete stuff that's from like months old, like PCAPs. Really, PCAPs are going to be the biggest consumption of disk space when you're running NIDs. But like for you and I that are running this at home, even if we do have a lot of intranet traffic, it's really not going to take up a lot of stuff. I know I can probably get probably 4 to 5 months of raw PCAPs before I even have to start going back and deleting old logs. So like I said, with the operating system and everything I've been doing so far, I've only used 11 gigs. So if you even put just like a 100 gig or 76 or whatever number they have in there now, it should be enough. And then you can always attach storage later on, and just configure like a software RAID. That's what we did for Soteria. That's what I do for home use. So I may use a smaller disk for the operating system just to install Security Onion on. So it can even be a flash drive. Is what a lot of people do. I actually probably will switch to that. So just running it on like a 32 gig flash drive, and then mount using a software RAID and Linux. It's MDADM for software RAID, but then attaching a couple 100 gigabyte disks in a RAID array to the NSM directory, because that is where the vast majority of all the logs are stored is in NSM. So I'll just use a software RAID and then attach it to NSM on boot, and then all of my data will be stored on those big disks, and then the OS will just be running on a flash drive.
Okay, sounds good. Now I have use for all my old hard drives.
Yeah, there you go. That'll make use of them. And unless you have a lot of network traffic, which as a home user we don't. Unless you're have an ingress and egress of like 100 gigs a day, or you have like some like QSFP ports where you're transferring data at like 40 gigs a second. Hard drives are perfectly fine with doing this. You don't need your storage to be running on enterprise SAS SSD drives or NVMe drives. Hard drives, your typical SATA 3 hard drive will handle this perfectly, with no problems. So, and I can go through, if you guys are setting this up at home, how to, if you want to just run the OS off of a USB drive and you want to just attach storage later on, or you just want to run everything on, one RAID array or one disk, that's fine too, however you want to set it up.
Cool. Thanks.
So I will rep Soteria a little bit here, and then ask if there's any last questions or comments. We, as pretty much every other vendor, NSM vendor, network security monitoring vendor does, we use Security Onion, a very tailored. We customize it very much in house. I was on the team that I led that team that did that. We've modified Security Onion so much that you could probably say it's a fork of it now. But so like I said, with the licenses with Security Onion, You cannot sell Security Onion by itself. You can't just sell the software. It's under the GNU public license. So same for Ubuntu or any derivative of that, or any, I guess I should say, Debian derivative. Kali, being one of them. You can't just sell the software. You have to sell it as a service. So it's okay to sell hardware with it installed, because they're paying for the hardware. So you can sell, for example, a server with Security Onion installed on it and just sell it at a flat price, because they're paying for the hardware. But if you're offering it, if you're offering just Security Onion, you have to sell it as a service behind that, because it's not a closed source project. It's under that GNU public license. So that's why even Doug Burks, the maintainer of it, he has the professional services that he sells behind it. So a lot of your network security events, including Unify, Cisco, WatchGuard, Fortinet, a lot of these things are just kind of like taking the rule sets of Snort and Suricata and running them, in addition with maybe some other feeds, and just tweaking them. The same thing with Bro. They're just kind of like taking those scripts and writing some new ones and modifying it, or Zeek as it's known now. So those two things are just like industry wide. It's not normal to see someone build their own network intrusion detection system. You can start with Suricata and Bro and just kind of build it from there. That's what we did at a high level. We put a lot of our own logic into it, and rules and things like that. But at a high level, that's really where network sensor monitoring is for any company. And then you're really paying for the services to manage that, and then provide the managed detection and response services for the alerts. So that's what a lot of MDR providers and your managed security providers are doing on the back end. They're shipping you a sensor to plug into your network, sniff traffic, and just have the logs and alerts reporting back to you, and then acting on those. So for Soteria's standpoint, we actually chose to kind of take an end of life approach to our network security monitoring. The reason for that is because, as you guys know, visibility at the network level is constantly decreasing with the amount that encryption and privacy keeps increasing. So those things kind of, they have an indirect relationship. The more you can see, the less privacy and encryption you're going to have. The more privacy and encryption you're going to have, the less visibility you have on the network. Unless you're running to a client where they have the budget and they can do SSL decryption, and then re-encrypt it before it goes to the public internet, which a lot of companies don't have. A lot of companies do have it, but they don't implement it properly, and it just doesn't work out well. So the network kind of monitoring is slowly kind of fading a little bit. So for that reason, especially with DNS over HTTPS, you can't even see DNS queries now. It's just you're constantly losing visibility. TLS 1.3 made it even more difficult to look at fingerprints and hashes for like web certificates. TLS 1.4 and staging is going to make it even more difficult. So instead of kind of trying to keep up with this ever encrypting network services, we chose to go more with our EDR service, which is endpoint detection and response. So you have much more visibility on the actual endpoint than you do through the network, and you can still catch a lot of network traffic on the endpoint, not coming from other devices, but as far as what sockets are open on the endpoint itself. So there's a lot more visibility that way. And with the way that the industry is moving to cloud, it's difficult to get the actual traffic for cloud into a sensor like that. It's not as easy as just setting up a span port and then sending traffic to the sniffing interface. You can do certain routing things with VPCs and packet mirroring and VPC mirroring, and then doing that. It's a little more difficult to set up. There's definitely not as many cloud architects and engineers out there as just regular on-prem network engineers. as far as setting that up. So it's more difficult to set that up. And even then, the traffic logs that you're getting in a VPC cloud are not the same that you're going to be getting in a network level, just from a raw PCAP standpoint. So there's not as much data in the actual network traffic. So it wasn't really a good approach for us or really the industry. So that's why you see a lot more endpoint stuff popping up now with CrowdStrike, Carbon Black, Red Canary, a lot of the big players kind of moving and staying in the endpoint. And now really the big thing is container and Kubernetes monitoring. There's a huge push to Docker and running things in containers and Kubernetes. So that's where a lot of the visibility is going into now. That's where we at Soteria are moving into more of the container and Kubernetes monitoring. There's a large ask for that in the industry, as well as cloud monitoring at a high level. Like I said, with OSSEC, just monitoring at a high level, you don't get a lot of granularity. That it's kind of one of those things that's a mile wide, but only an inch deep of data. We like to be really good at one thing as opposed to pretty good at a lot of things. So we like to move. We're moving into the Office 365 monitoring space, as well as the container and Kubernetes space, just because that's where the future is heading, and we are able to get a large amount of data that we're able to work with for that, as well as the endpoint, and provide a lot of IR services alongside that. So that's where we are at Soteria. As far as the development perspective, it's running into a really cool place. We're able to beta those things with a really cool client, a lot of really cool clients in a lot of different industries. We've developed a lot of unique asks for monitoring, especially with the endpoint detection and response, being able to not just detect things, but be able to respond to them in an IR fashion. So when we do get IR calls, we actually deploy our endpoint detection and response agents because we are able to use that as an IR tool as well as a monitoring tool on just an endpoint. So it has a lot of functionality, as well as tying all of that in with Kubernetes and O365. We can get a large visualizations on an organization's infrastructure going forward. And like I said, with the container and Kubernetes kind of monitoring, the large ask there is for actual runtime security. And if you're not familiar with containers, I would recommend it because the future is going there. The future is also going with cloud. I'd highly recommend just learning so you don't get left behind. But the large ask with a container is, the things about containers is they share, they have kernel level access to whatever box they're running on. So you have to be able to track the actual things that are going on runtime, since it does have kernel level access, as opposed to VMs that are hard to track. So you can't just stick an agent inside a container because containers aren't meant to be persistent. So they have to be constantly destroyed, redeployed, almost on a daily basis. Sometimes more than that. So it's not as easy as just sticking a persistent agent in there. You have to be able to track, the actual runtime security of that, as well as if it's writing things to disk. It's much more of a challenge. But fortunately, we have some really smart people at Soteria working on that now. We're betaing that with a lot of software as a service companies that have most of their infrastructure in Kubernetes. There are some companies out there like Sysdig, StackRox that do just container and Kubernetes monitoring that are pretty cool. We haven't been too thrilled with how they deploy it. We're actually a little concerned with the security of their product. So we always like to follow in the security industry. All of principle of least privilege. We don't want to be monitoring your container with root privileges where someone could, potentially if they gained access to, they'd have immediate access to a root container, or a container that has root privileges that could, you could move laterally within the environment and potentially take it over. So we're kind of building a lot of that stuff out in house, and it's been really cool so far. And we're really looking forward to bringing that stuff to market and baiting it with some really cool software as a service companies. So that's kind of the direction that we're moving in with Soteria. We're always taking applications. Doesn't matter if we're always hiring. If we get the right candidate in. I'd say now we're actually looking more for on the consulting and pen testing side of the house and the SOC and IR side of the house. Brandon joined us. Brandon Halley joined under me as a junior engineer back in March full time. He's been doing an excellent job so far. Very happy with the work he's doing. He actually is the one that introduced me to the doing these workshops at Trident Tech. And I think you guys would be the best source for this, but I think it's been useful. I've definitely enjoyed talking with you all, especially one-on-one over text or LinkedIn and such. I've had the opportunity to meet Chad in person. And Chad, thank you for setting all of these up. But we're always even if you're not looking for a job at Soteria, just for a learning experience, if you want to come in and talk with our developers or with Brandon and I on the engineering side, or just see how our SOC team works, or IR or consulting and pen testing, we're always happy to bring those in just to kind of get you in on some of the experience stuff, even if you're in school, you're not ready to take on a full-time job, you don't want to do even an internship now, you just want to kind of get a taste for what it's like for how it actually works in the industry, because there is a large gap between academia and industry. So if you're looking to really bridge that gap, and you just want to come in and you have more specific questions, you just want to sit with a developer for a day, sit with an engineer for a day, sit with a pen tester for a day, we're always happy to just reach out. All of those being free services, we're always looking to give back to the community, especially in South Carolina, especially in Charleston, because that's where our headquarters are. And especially, with Trident, with working with all you guys that have, clearly dedicated for taking out a Saturday morning to learn about Security Onion and OSSEC, which I'm sure a lot of people aren't doing. So really appreciate your time with doing that. And yeah, that's my Soteria pitch there. Clearly, I'm not a salesperson, so they keep me in the back end of the house. So anything else, before I wrap up? Doesn't have to pertain to Security Onion, but happy to answer any questions, comments.
As somebody new coming into the industry, is there anything else that we might be able to study, probably online or something like that could put us in the forefront of those wanting to hire us, especially coming into the new stuff that you were talking about there too, containerization and working in that realm, which I really had never thought about. Actually, I knew about about AWS and that kind of stuff, but I didn't know about the containerization studies, that kind of stuff. So
yes, so containerization is moving more on the more and more developers using that. The interesting thing about containers is they are not secure by default. They use root privileges, and they have kernel level access to the operating system that they're running on. They were built for availability and quick access to programs that can run on any type of OS just by using Docker. Developers love things that work really quick and are kind of slow to worry about the security, which is where your DevSecOps and your security engineering team comes in. Best things I can say as far as like a resume builder and learning these technologies is just by doing it. If you can put on a resume that you've stood up a home lab with Kubernetes, or I have some Docker things running in a Docker container, that puts you miles ahead that someone that's never even heard of the term Docker before. It's not that hard to just get used to. I mean, any of these how-to guides, how to Docker. Docker has a ton of their own docs on getting started. If you feel like those are too complex, DigitalOcean is always a really good reference on stuff, how to Forge. A lot of these things are super simple to set up, as well as YouTube. And of course, always, I would say probably even more important is cloud. You can make a free account on AWS, Azure, GCP. All of those have their own managed Kubernetes orchestration tools. So you don't have to stand up Kubernetes yourself. It's already there. You just have to deploy the containers. But I would say, more than that, just on a general level, it is hard to find people that have good cloud experience and working within the cloud. that doesn't mean you have to wait for the job to come up and then you have to work at that job and start working in the cloud. You can definitely put on a resume, that you host your own AWS VPC or your Azure VPC or GCP VPC, and you have VMs in there, and you are aware of how in GCP compute engine works and Kubernetes engine works, and firewall rules work. That's going to put you miles ahead of other candidates, not only because you have that knowledge, but because the company sees that you are investing your own time into learning. And it's much harder to find people that are passionate about learning than people that are, come in and they know the knowledge from, working at previous jobs or academia or whatever, and then wanting to learn more. It's generally just wanting to come and work 8 to 5, being handed down work, and then leave. We're definitely not like that, Soteria. We are very much into the what's on the bleeding edge, like what can we do next to be the first to do this, or how can we use this differently that nobody else is doing it before. We're all extremely passionate about learning new things at Soteria, and that's really the number one thing that we look for, and at least I do for development and engineering, is how passionate you are about the position. We have passed over multiple times more knowledgeable candidates to hire candidates that are more passionate but may not know as much off the bat. Passion and initiative on learning is definitely takes precedence over your current knowledge base. That said, if someone has 20 years experience over you and you're just coming in, but if you're talking 5 years experience, and then someone comes in with semi-relevant knowledge and has a much greater passion, like Chad, you having a home lab, that speaks volumes about character just over knowledge. Like I said, the industry is tending towards the cloud. All of the 3 major cloud providers have their own certification programs. The most popular ones being AWS Certified Solutions Architect, and Google has some. I'm taking more Google certs at the end of the month, actually, for their cloud as well as Azure. AWS definitely has the most of the market share right now. Azure is catching up very quickly. GCP has a lot of really cool stuff as well. You can't really go wrong with any of them. From a technology perspective, they all kind of work the same way. They just have different naming conventions, and maybe a few different type of tooling from cloud to cloud, but large as far as VMs and Kubernetes and serverless type stuff and logging, a lot of them function the exact same way, just different nomenclature. So definitely getting a jump start on that before applying to a job is going to put you in a good position. Just saying that you have at least some knowledge with logging into the console, rather than I've never touched AWS. I wouldn't even know where to go to log in, type of thing.
Anybody have any other questions out there? Well, Anthony, I just want to thank you again for doing this for us and going over OSSEC and WSA. That will be definitely helpful for us to be able to look at all that stuff again. And as I've said before, I have recorded this, so I will be putting it out here as soon as I can get it back out and edited. Thank you again, Anthony, for doing this for us. I do appreciate it, and I appreciate the time Soteria is investing in our students at Trident Tech. Thank you for doing this for us. I appreciate it. We all appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Anthony.
We're always here to help, and like I said, I'm personally always available on LinkedIn, on Discord, email. So I'm always down to nerd out. So just shoot me a message with anything, anytime. Always available to you guys. And thanks again. Hope you guys have a great weekend.
Thank you. You too, Anthony. Appreciate it. Bye, everyone.